All right, hi everybody. Ryan Pruitt, typical white guy. Breaking news. We're going to come at this Rachel Maddow style, where we kind of start off abstract and then we bring it in for a landing. Um, One of my favorite movies is The Fugitive. Tommy Lee Jones as the U.S. Marshal and his little unit, his squad. Just how well they work together and how well the characters were drawn. They early in the movie, after the bus crashes and Harrison Ford escapes, the senior prison guard gives his statement to the U.S. Marshals, and he says that everyone aboard, all the prisoners were either killed or recaught, that everyone's accounted for. They then find a pair of empty handcuffs, which Tommy Lee Jones says, they're a little concerned when they have handcuffs with no hands in them. And he says to the prison guard, "Would you like to revise your statement?" The guard says, "What do you mean?" And that's when one of the other U.S. Marshals says, "Would you like to come off your bullshit story?" Gordon Sondland today has revised his statement. Gordon Sondland was one of the first people to come forward and testify when he got subpoenaed. He is his title was U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, but somehow, especially once Yovanovitch got ousted as the actual Ukraine ambassador, Sondland somehow took on the role of point person, the unofficial ambassador to Ukraine. He was one of the first to testify, and he gave his initial version of events. And then along the way, other people came along and testified and gave their version of events. And over time, the stories are linking and not linking and checking and cross-checking. And there have been... Gordon's story had some holes in it. So it's November 5th. There are still closed-door depositions happening, or supposed to be happening. This week, the people that have been called as the House committee gets closer and closer to President Trump, you have people, they're going back to the original play of stonewalling, of not showing up for these depositions. You have someone from OMB who worked under Mulvaney, refused to show up. John Eisenberg, who is an NSC lawyer, he's a critical point of contact in all this. His name has come up several directions. Also refused to testify. Which, at this point, these people not testifying, I don't care. We've got enough for now of people that have shown up. And one thing they always point out, and actually Adam Schiff just pointed this out, is that when Nixon was impeached, one of the articles of impeachment was contempt of Congress. And literally what that article of impeachment was, the crime being committed, was they simply listed the people who had been subpoenaed by the House and that by direction of the President had not shown up. That in itself was simply the crime. So these people that don't show up now, they go on the list, and that goes under that article of impeachment. The truth is coming out, because what happened. So you have closed door depositions still supposed to be happening. Well, this week, They're beginning to release the transcripts from those closed door depositions, as Republicans have eagerly, at least said they eagerly wanted. So I guess among this week, the transcripts that came out were Gordon Sondland. And it turns out that Gordon, he gave his initial testimony. These other people showed up. Leaks came out of what was being said. And I guess Gordo he saw the light. And he decided to come off his bullshit story. And he went back in and testified. So what was released today was the transcript, I guess, of both his original testimony and his, as Tommy Lee Jones said, his revised statement. And in his revised statement, he acknowledged that he had alerted the Ukrainians that they needed to go along with the investigative request being made by Giuliani, being demanded by Giuliani. Giuliani, who has no official role, who was working for free outside of the government, the ambassador assigned to this was working for the president's personal lawyer, who was there simply defending Trump, as he has always said. So Sondland now acknowledges that he alerted the Ukrainians that they needed to go along with the investigative request being demanded by Giuliani. By early September, which is before the money was released, I just lost it. By early September, Mr. Sondland said he had become convinced that military aid and a White House meeting were conditioned on Ukraine committing to those investigations. Not, this is something they should look into. Not, they were already looking into corruption, and if they happen to come along this specific information, that would be great, but not necessary. It was the conditions they were referring to when we're conditioned on Ukraine committing to those investigations. Those investigations are the July 25th phone call, which was CrowdStrike, about 2016. And, for a second, let's talk about that. One of the arguments had been that if President Trump requested an investigation into 2016, that was A, good for the country, and B, had nothing to do with the 2020 election. It, as Mulvaney said, was about looking back. It had nothing to do with going forward. However, the personal political gain, if President Trump, the theory goes that Ukraine were actually the ones who hacked the DNC to frame Russia to help, I guess, I don't know if that helps the DNC, but the theory is that if Trump's theory is correct, that Ukraine and the DNC were in on this together, that the DNC was corrupt in 2016, that is a personal political gain as the leading Republican presidential nominee into 2020. If he can prove corruption happened in 2016 by the Democrats, that is to his political advantage to 2020. So I that argument that somehow that request alone into that investigation doesn't benefit him going forward is just not true. And even if that could be argued, the great thing about President Trump is he asked for two favors. The first was CrowdStrike and the DNC server that was hidden in Ukraine because they don't know about the cloud. But anyway, but the second part of those investigations, he specifically mentions Joe Biden's son directly. Not corruption in Ukraine, not corruption in Ukraine that maybe might have to do with Biden's son. No, he went straight to Biden's son. And it wasn't just a request. It was a demand. It was, and I haven't read the rest of the transcript yet, but the headline is that Sondland basically is that he acknowledges that there was a quid pro quo, that this was a something for something, that it, and the somethings were not vague. There had been talk lately that Republicans were starting to come off the he did nothing wrong argument to he did nothing impeachable. And you have to wonder if, I mean, I think in various ways with the leaks that were coming out, like I said, of all the leaking, of the minor details that have coming out from all these hours of testimony, none of it had, there was only one part so far that had, that was good news for Trump. And that was when Tim Morrison, when he testified, he verified everyone else's version, but he said he personally didn't think the president did anything illegal, which, like I thought, immediately got out by the Republicans through Fox News, and boom, headline, hey, investigation over. That's all they've gotten out that is good. If there was more good, I know it's just a guy on Twitter, but the debate I had with a Trump supporter on Twitter was, I'd argued, if they had good news, they would have. Why? Are you telling me that the Republicans are not releasing any of the exonerating evidence because of what honor or? And he was like, oh yeah, the Republicans have a code of ethics. Not any more than Democrats. If there was good news, they would release it, and Tim Morrison is the proof of that, because the one snippet of good news they had flew right out of that room. So with everything coming out, I guess Gordon Sondland saw the writing on the wall, and the headline today is that he flipped. That's the official, not official, but that's the term being thrown around. That's huge. They were already having to pivot off the, first it was hearsay. First it was that this is all what people are just saying that other people said. And now those other people have now come forward and said, yeah, we said that. We had a problem before the phone call. We had a problem right after the phone call. We still have a problem with the phone call. And so now we're getting we're getting to the actual argument, the real debate of what can a president do? What can a Republican president do with a Republican-controlled Senate? Lindsey Graham was very frank the other day and said, I read the transcript of the president's phone call. I see nothing wrong. That is the part, the minds we have to change. It's not about the action. Presidents are allowed to make phone calls. They're even allowed to make requests. But what they can't do, when you talk about those investigations cannot be a favor to you as the Republican candidate for president. It's not in the national, that's the biggest, that's it. It is not in the national interest for President Trump to be reelected, but he thinks it is. That's where we're headed. And what Gordon Sondland at least did is that, I guess give him some credit for not wanting to get, caught lying to Congress. But he at least has now put it out there that, look, this is what people have been saying it is. Now we just have to, now the argument is going to be what it is it impeachable? But at least we're finally getting the statements revised, and we're coming off the bullshit, and I'm happy. All right, till next time.